Hey everybody. Hopefully you can see me okay. And I'm going to check to make sure that I am live. But if you are here on Facebook, come join me. As you can see from the title that I put on this message today, and really it's not a message, it's me sharing my story, but the title that I put on it it is a moment for me to share my story with you all. Hopefully by now, if you run across my profile, you've read my testimony on my page. But if not, go read it. It was a post of me really being transparent and sharing my journey with you all, just about what I've been through, and also the things that God has done in my life. So if you haven't seen it, go see it. Let me double check here to make sure I'm good. And yeah, I am. All right, well, just want to start out by saying, again, thank you for joining me tonight. And if you're scrolling past, please come in, because this is certainly a story that you're going to hear. But God put it on my heart this morning to come up here and to share with you all just not only about my journey, but how I was able to basically turn away from a lifestyle that I've lived for almost 20 years. And when I sat down, I'll be honest, this isn't the easiest thing to do. If you know me personally, you know that I'm very private, but I think it's so important for us to just come out and share our stories, because we all have a story. We all have a past, we all have a present, we all have things that we've gone through. And I think it's so important to share your story, because you never know who needs to hear your story, and you never know how God can use what you've been through to deliver someone else, or to help someone else out, to encourage them, to let them know that, hey, there really is a way out. So just want to share with you, I guess first off, where I'll start is with my history. So for those who don't know me, I started dating women. I'll just jump into it. But I started dating women about late in high school. And I remember, in high school, for me, it wasn't something that I really thought about prior to being approached. And when I was approached about, dating a woman, initially I was kind of like, okay, whatever. But then eventually, I decided, okay, this is something that I want to try. And so I started dating women then, and pretty much have been dating women up until most recent years. And I see people are coming on. Hey, Don. Hey, Nicole. And for me, I was someone who was raised in the church. And probably like most of you, or maybe not all of you that are watching, but church was a big part of my life growing up. My mom was in ministry, my dad was in ministry, and we spent majority of our time at church. We were there for, I got to a point where I'm like, Mom, we're here like every day of the week. And so we were there for Sunday service, we were there for Bible study. And one of the things about going to church was my parents always, as you can see in my testimony, they always stressed the importance of, you need to develop a relationship with God. It's important to have God as a part of your life. It's important for God to be first in your life. And so those were things that I always strive for, or that I always wanted. But Nicole, of course I remember you. And so those are things that I always I wanted. I always wanted a relationship with God. But to be honest, when I was younger, I really didn't know what that meant. Because, they talked about, oh, well, you want to make sure you pray. You want to go to God basically for everything. But as a child, I really didn't understood what a true relationship was like. And so when I was very young, I definitely, I prayed, I did all of those things. attended church. But as I got older, it got to a point in my life around college time frame to where, honestly, I was at a point in my life where I said, I've been at church majority of my life, and I really just wanted to do things my way. And so, as I mentioned in my story, a part of doing things my way was not going to church, but then also I started, drinking. I was at that point in college. I was in relationships with women, and I was still dating men at that point. But then, as time went on, I made a decision that, I just wanted fully date women. And so, probably about the end of college, I think that's when I don't think it was an actual decision that I made that I wanted to date women, but it just got to a point where I said, I really like women, so I'm gonna date them, and that's what I did. And so I had a number of relationships throughout, after college coming out. I had, long relationships. I had shorter relationships. And throughout that time, hey Tamika, hey Robert, and throughout that time of the relationships that I had, those relationships were very genuine. And that's one thing that I do want to share about my story is, although I'm in a place now where I've stepped away from that lifestyle, the relationships were very genuine. But I will say that throughout time, and I'll say even I considered marriage. There were times in my life where I was like, I'm going to marry a woman. And Simcia, I was about to say Simcia, I don't know what your real name is, but I hope it's Sia that I used to work with, but if it is, hey Sia. And so, as I mentioned, I got to a point to where I really decided that I wanted to date women, even marry a woman. And I'll be honest, getting to that point, because being that my family was so rooted in church, that was a hard decision to make at that time. It was certainly tough to go to my parents and go to my family and be like, I think I'm going to marry a woman. Like, I'm into this relationship. I really love this person, and I want to marry them. Hey Sierra, hey Ashley. And when I got to that point that I wanted to marry a woman, I was all in it. I was just like, this is what I really, really want to do. And I'll be honest, there was a period in my life where I felt judged. I felt judged by the church. I felt like people, even though people didn't really say it, but how you can feel sometimes when people are judging you for the lifestyle that you live. And I'll be honest that judgment really kept me further away from the church. The judgment made it so that I didn't even want to be around anything that had anything to do with Christ, because I just really didn't want to be judged for the lifestyle that I was living. But I can honestly say that I've been really blessed to where both of my parents have always supported me regardless. Like they love me genuinely. We had some hiccups early on. It wasn't always easy, but as I got older, definitely got to a place with my parents to where they supported me full time. And so went through that relationship that I had, and then about 2015, and so mind you, during these relationships, during these parts in my life, God was always in the back. He was, and I'll say this, I always considered myself to be a believer. Hey Sierra, I love you too. I always considered myself to be a believer because I always believed that, God exists. I believed that, Jesus died for our sins. I believed in heaven and hell. And to be honest, any time that I went through, or I was in a place in my life to where I was down or something happened, I'm always like, hey, I need to pray. So I always went back to God, but at the same time, God was on the back burner in my life. And what I mean by that is I wasn't putting any energy and effort to further develop that relationship with God at all. And it wasn't until about 2015. So 2015 was the first time that I kind of made, you always have those New Year resolutions, and I'll be honest, I see people post about it, and I'm one of those people too, where I'm not when people say New Year, new me, and all of that, I've always, well, I used to do it, but but now I'm like, it should just be a New Year's resolution. But there were in 2015, I did make a New Year's resolution that I wanted to grow closer to God. And so, the one time a year that most people will go to church is Easter Sunday. And so Easter Sunday, I was in there. I was like, all right, I'm gonna go. And I went to a church, and the message was about hearing God's voice. And so when I heard that message about hearing God's voice, I was like, okay, this is pretty cool. And one thing it spoke about is how where you find God most times are going to be in the still places. So you can find God when it's quiet. But then he also talked about the Holy Spirit and how when you're living a life where you're doing things that don't align with God's will, how you won't be at peace. And so when I heard that, you listen to stuff, but then you don't receive it, but you heard it, and it's kind of like it flows in one ear out the other, but in reality you did receive it. And so what ended up happening after I left that church service, or let me not skip, I actually gave my life to Christ while I was in that church service. So I was like, you know what, I'm going to make a declaration today that I'm going to walk with God. And so I left the church service. I was so excited. I remember leaving, and I can't remember who I talked to, but I was like, yeah, I gave my life back to Christ, and da-da-da-da. I felt good. I felt light. I felt really good. But then shortly after, I don't even remember how many days it was, but shortly after, I literally heard that still small voice tell me that you need to leave the relationship that you're in. And, at the time I was like, all in my relationship. I was all about it. I'm like, and so when I heard that, I immediately just started crying. I was so distraught. I was like, no, this is not what I want to do. I know God is telling me to do this, but this is not, I don't want to do that. I don't want to leave this relationship with this woman because I love her. I want to be with her, and I didn't want to do it. And so what ended up happening was, after that point, hey Jeremy, hey Joy, hey Maria, hey Heather, hey T. So after that point, I was like, you know what? I don't even want to hear nothing else God has to say. And I'm just keeping it real, because I really didn't want to hear nothing else God had to say. And so I just kind of went back to doing things my way. I was like, I'm not going to church. I'm not about to catch nobody's Bible study. I'm not about to listen to any message of that sort, because what God was telling me to do went against what I felt in my heart, and what I felt, just overall how I felt about it. I was like, I don't agree. And so, years passed, and I was still doing things, still in the same-sex relationships. Started drinking. I think at one point started drinking even heavier. And I'll say fast forward a few years to 2020, and so this went on. 2020 came. And so by 2020, I hit some throughout, I'll say from 2015 to 2020, my life, probably like most of ours, hit some peaks and some valleys. So where there were some moments that were really, really good, and then some moments where I felt like I had truly hit rock bottom. And throughout those moments, I still always tried to, in a way, go to God. In reality, I really wasn't going to God to let him help me. I was going to him to dump stuff at his feet, and really make it seem like I was going to God for help. But in reality, if you're going to someone for help, you're going to allow them to help you. And as I mentioned, I didn't want to do the things that God was asking me to do. And so I'll catch back up to about 2020. So when 2020 came, it was one of those periods, I'll be honest, probably like most of us, to where 2020 was a rough year. When COVID hit in 2020, it was just being forced to sit. I remember sitting in this house, and I was trying my best to like just occupy my mind and just occupy everything that was, I was trying my best to keep busy. But with everything shut down, bars were shut down. I felt like, and I was one of those, I'll be honest, when COVID first hit, I was one of those paranoid type people. And so I don't know about you all, but I would be wiping down groceries and stuff, like with, I think about it now and it's so funny, even though you still should protect yourself, of course. But I was like going OD with it. But because of that, I really didn't go many places. I sat in the house, and I just remember getting to a place to where I was just internally unhappy. I was so unhappy, and I don't really know how to describe it, but it was one of those things where you're in a place in your life, and you just kind of think there has to be a better way, and I continued though to try to do things my way. And what ended up happening was, I don't know if it's ever happened to you all, but I felt like I was literally a hamster in a hamster wheel that was just going in cycles, literally going through the same things over and over and over and over again. And I really got to a point to where I was like, I'm tired. Have you ever gotten to a place in your life to where you're like, what, I'm just tired. I'm tired of I feel like I keep going through the same old mess. And that's the place that I got to where I was like, I feel like I'm going through the same mess over and over. And the one thing, and as you said, Crystal, and going nowhere. And one thing that, whenever, because my mom has always been a person that I can talk to about anything. She's always been very non-judgmental. As I mentioned, she's an apostle, but I would go to my mom, I went to my sister, and sometimes when you call people for a solution and you want them to help you, but then after you leave that conversation, you feel the same. Or sometimes you walk away from that conversation and you might feel a little better. You're like, okay, well, I got it off my chest. But then sometimes not even 10 minutes later, you're back in the same mess that you were in before you even picked up the phone and made that call. And so that kept happening to me. But one thing that all of the people that I was talking to, they kept telling me, go to God, go to God. And I say it with that tone because that's how I felt when they would say it to me. My mom would be like, you need to go to God. And I'm like, oh. Like, I was like, oh, I don't want to go to God. And she was like, you need to go to God. And I called my sister, and shout out to my sister. She was there for me through a lot. And she's like, you need to go to God. And I'm like, oh, I don't want to go to God. And so what I started doing was, instead of going to God, I literally started to try to solve my problems on my own. But what it resulted in was me coping, and using alcohol as a way to cope. So I started drinking very, very heavily, and even started smoking weed. And I'm not knocking anyone who smokes, but that's never been me. That's never been a thing for me. And it got to a place to where I remember one day I was just crying and I was down, and during all of this I was dating someone, and the person that I was dating also was a believer. And so there would be moments where she would share something about, like, well, you need to pray, or you need to give it to God, or different things of that nature. But I just remember being in a place in 2020, in probably about the middle of 2020, to where I truly just hit rock bottom. I wasn't happy with myself as to, you know, career-wise and stuff, things were fine, but just who I was, looking at myself in the mirror, I wasn't happy with what I saw. I knew that this wasn't the life that God had for me. I'm like, there's no way that, you know, God wanted me to be in this place right now. I'm like, there has to be no way. And so, because of that, like I said, I was one night when I hit rock bottom, I was just crying, and I don't even remember why I was crying, but I was just crying. I was bawling my eyes out, and on social media, and mind you, it had to be God, because during that year, I actually went off social media for about 8 months out the total year, but there was a short amount of time to where I went back on social media. And when I got back on social media, I ran across this post that talked about being worthy, and I looked at the post and I was like, man, I immediately felt like, no, I'm not worthy. You know, I'm not worthy of forgiveness. I'm not worthy of anything. I was like, you know, and not even just where I felt like I did something that was really, really wrong. I was just in a place of, I was like, how could God love me and allow me to go through these things? You know, how could God be who he is? And even more so, I'll tell you, at one point in my walk, I was like, if this is so wrong, why is God allowing me to do it? I truly felt like, if it's wrong for me to be in a relationship with a woman, then why am I here? And I'll be honest with you all, when there were points in my life where I had to sit down and really think about, you know, is this really what I want for my life? And for a long time, that the answer to that question was yes. But it wasn't until I remember, it was sometime in 2020, I sat down with myself and the relationship that I was in, and I asked myself, I said, well, God, your word says that if I stay in this relationship with a woman, then, you know, if that means I'm living in sin. And if I'm living in sin and not doing what you're asking us to do, that means that I'm going to go to hell. You know, that was my thought process. I'm just being honest with you all. And so I literally sat there one day and asked myself, are you okay with going to hell for this relationship? And my answer to that question was yes. To be honest, it was yes. I sat down. I said, you know what, God, if this is wrong, so be it. Because I was in a place to where that's what I wanted. And as I mentioned, you know, I saw God's word, but I was like, I don't feel it. Like, I don't feel what your word is saying. I don't. And so, shortly after that, in the May time frame, when I ran across that post that said, are you worthy? And I said no. I commented on the post and I said no. And Kendra Dublin, who's my Christian coach, she ended up responding back, and she was like, why not? Why aren't you worthy? And I'm being that I'm private, I moved it to the inbox, to the DMs, because I was like, I ain't about to put all my business out here on on social media. So I moved the conversation to my DMs, and I basically just told her, I was like, I don't know. I said, I just feel like I'm not worthy of forgiveness. And so through that conversation, she really expressed about how much Jesus loves me, and just how much that he loves us. And, I've always heard it, but I truly didn't feel it. And so after that conversation, she was like, I have this 6-month coaching program that you can go through, blah, 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 blah. And so I was like, all right, I'm going to do it. And the coaching program was something that you have to pay for. And, I'm one of those people, I don't know about you, I'm one of those people, I'm like, if I pay for it, I'm going to do it. Like, if I spend money on something, then I'm going to do it. So I paid for it, and throughout the coaching program, a big part of it was reading the Word. You had to read the Bible every day. And I'll be honest, I struggled with that. Like, and it got to a point to where she had to text me every day and be like, did you read today? And it was only one chapter a day, so it wasn't, the program wasn't asking for a lot, but, she's like, you just need to read one chapter a day. And what I didn't realize was by me reading those one chapters a day, it was teaching me about who God is. It was teaching me about God's love. It was teaching me about God's grace. And so during this time, and this was, I think I started her program, I think it might have been May, June. But then during this time, so I'm reading God's Word. Sometimes I was reading God's Word, I was drunk. I was like, drinking. I'm like, all right, I'm going to read this Bible, but I'm drinking and so forth. And while doing that as well, I was still, and at this point, I started to take small steps to leave the relationship that I was in, because it was something that God told me. He told me in 2020, you need to leave this relationship. And as I mentioned, I was fighting everything that God was telling me to do. But I was reading His Word, and at the same time, still doing everything that I was doing. And so I still was, in the same-sex relationship. I still was drinking. I was still doing that. But then over time, as I got to learn more about who God is, the Word really started to convict me. It really started to change my view on things. But I'll tell you what was most important during that time was just being honest with God. And I was so honest with Him about how I felt. I told God, I was like, I know what your Word says, but I don't agree. I don't feel it. And so I was like, Lord, you're going to have to change my heart. I told God, I said, if you want me to live this life that you're telling me that, based on your Word, that you're telling me that I'm supposed to live, then God, you're going to have to change my heart. And that was my prayer for a long time. And even still my prayer today is that God continues to change my heart. And so, over time, as I kept reading His Word and kept reading His Word, eventually God had me start teaching Bible study. And so about August of 2020, God was like, I want you to teach Bible study. And I'll be honest, that when He first told me that, I was like, yeah, you want me to teach? Like, did you forget who you're talking to? Like, did you forget that I'm dating this woman who you told me to leave? And I'm also, having sex. I'm also drinking. I'm doing all these things that your Word tells us not to do. And I'm like, do you really want me to teach these Bible studies? Like, how am I an example to be teaching these other people? And so He just kept telling me. He said, I want you to teach Bible study. And so I was like, all right. And that day I ended up calling up some friends, texting some friends that I knew, and was like, hey, I'm about to start a Bible study, do you want to join in, blah, blah, blah. And so I started teaching. And I'll tell you just a sidebar, what was interesting about during that time frame is the closer I got to God, the more the enemy tried to step in as a distraction. And that's one thing that the enemy will do is whenever you're taking a step in your life for something that God has called you to do, or taking a step in your life to change, that is when the enemy will try to come and try to get you off course. And that was one of the things that he did. And what I started to notice was every time I would literally, like, I could be here by myself. And every time I would pick up the Bible, a certain person would text. or a certain person would call me. Like it started to be like clockwork, to where every time I was trying to grow and learn more about God, to where it was just like, boom, this person hit me up, or boom, hey, you want to go here? And early on in my walk, I was like, well, time to put the Bible up, let's go. But I just wanted to share with you all that whenever you are focused and you're trying to make a change, anticipate that the enemy is going to try to get you off course. And so, as I mentioned, I was teaching the Bible studies, and during that time, again, still doing everything that I knew that went against what I was teaching. And so it wasn't until one of my friends, she told me, she was like, yeah, she said, I love it that you're real. And I was like, what you mean? She was like, because you teach Bible study, but you also do your thing. And although she meant that in a good way, she meant that she liked it that I keep it real, which I do. That's one thing that I try to do, is just be real about stuff. But what she was telling me was, I see that you're living in sin and it's okay, but then you're also teaching the word. And so when she said that, I was like, oof. And it sat with me for a while. It honestly, it sat with me. And I realized, I said, God, I can't continue to teach your word and live the life that I live. I was like, I can't continue to do that. Like, I can't. I have to choose. And ultimately, that's where I was at that point. I was like, I have to choose which way I want to go. Because one thing that we can't do is we can't be lukewarm. You're either in or you're out. It's just like, we think about friends. They're either your friend or they're not. And a lot of times we approach our relationships with God as we want to be 1 foot in and 1 foot out. And not to say that, you won't fall short sometimes, not to say that you won't sin. It definitely, we all fall short. But ultimately, we have to make a decision of who are we going to follow? Are we going to follow with the things that God is asking us to do, or are we going to ultimately follow the things that we want to do, the things of our flesh, or the things that the enemy is trying to pull us towards? And so after that happened, that sat with me for a while. It honestly, it sat with me. But I kept doing the things that I was doing. I was like, you know what, forget it. I'm still going to do the things that I was doing. And so one thing about God is, when God can't get your attention when he's talking to you, he will try to get your attention through someone else. God knows how to speak to us. And so what God ended up doing was, he started to speak to me through other means. Through other people approaching me and all of that, through the person that I was dating. And so the first time, I'll fast forward a little bit, but the first time that God spoke to, well, not the first time, but I would say the time that really hit me in my heart when God spoke to me was, I was watching this video. It was these interviews that this woman of God does on Instagram, and I followed her. And the interviews were, she was interviewing different people every day. You could watch the video and so forth. And in the interview that I watched, the topic, I can't remember what the topic was about, but she asked a question. And the question that she asked the lady was, she said, what is your advice for someone who is someone who is struggling to move forward? And she said, make a decision. And she was like, by you not making a decision, you're making a decision. And when I heard that, I immediately literally just closed the laptop. I don't even think I shut it down. I just closed it. I was like, because I didn't want to hear it. I was like, I do not want to hear that. Because I knew that word was talking to me directly. I knew that God was speaking through her to speak to me, because he had been trying to speak to me directly so many times, and so many times I ignored everything that he said. I ignored all the people that he tried to bring my way. I tried to drown out with drinking. I wasn't trying to hear what God was saying. And so when I watched that interview and she said that, I was like, wow. And then the very next thing she said was, you're straddling the fence. And I knew that was me, because I had one leg in to where I was, when I had time, I was pulling out my Bible, I was reading the Word, I was teaching Bible study. But then it was like literally, you know how you get home from work and you take off your clothes, you put in your pajamas, and you're like a whole new person. Ladies, you may take off your eyelashes, or, and you're just a whole new person. And so that was literally me. I was living two different lives, because I was, in the Word and all this other stuff, but then I would shut it. And then I would go back over here and be drinking, having sex, in that same sex relationship that I was in. I was doing all of that. And so when she said straddling the fence, I was like, that was me. I legit was on both sides of the fence. And so after I heard that, I was convicted. I was so convicted. And it really made me think. And I just remember, I think shortly before that happened, to where, as I mentioned to you all, I told myself that I was okay with going to hell. I was like, I'm okay with going to hell. And God told me, though, He said, is your soul really worth this relationship? And I thought about that. I was like, ugh. Because He's like, by you choosing that relationship, you're choosing that relationship over yourself. And one thing that we all know is when we leave this earth, we can't take these earthly things with us. We can't take our house with us. We can't take that partner, that person that we're dating with us. We can't take things with us. It is just us and God on our dying day. We are to be judged by Him on our dying day. We can't take those things with us. So when He said, is that relationship more important than your soul? That was another moment where I was like, man, I was like, whew. And I'll fast back forward to where, after listening to that video, and she was like, you're straddling the fence, by you not making a decision, you're making a decision. Y'all, you would think, all these different examples of God speaking to me, you would think I would have made that choice a long time ago. I still chose the relationship. And so literally, I think probably like the next day later, the person that I was dating, and this was last year. This was actually the beginning of last year. And so the person that I was involved with at the time, God had also been telling them to walk away. And because she would tell me, she's like, God told me to walk away from the relationship and all this other stuff, and we would talk about it. But I just remember that day, she was, right after I had watched that video, she called me. She was like, hey, I'm about to come over. I was like, okay, come on over. And literally on her way over, she got to a car accident. Didn't even make it here that night, because she got to a car accident about halfway there. Car broke down, ended up having to go to the shop, to where I think someone ended up having to come pick her up, so she didn't make it here that night. And I remember her crying, or calling me and crying and telling me that God told her not to come to my house. And she decided to come anyway. And so when she decided to come anyway, she ended up, getting into a car accident. And once again, you would think this would be like the light that turns on, to where you're like, okay, you need to leave this alone. And instead of leaving it alone, I went to go pick her up. I was like, no worry. I was like, no, I don't think God's telling you that. But I knew that God was telling her that. But I was like, no, I don't think God's telling you that, so I'll come pick you up. And so I went to go pick her up, and then I brought her back to my house. Y'all, literally, I think it was it was either that night or the next night. We were chilling in the living room, and I think I was probably even sitting on this couch that I'm on now, and she was sitting on the floor. And we were watching something, and she looked at me, y'all, and you know the words that came out of her mouth. She looked at me and she said, and we were talking about something. She said, "Melinda, you're straddling the fence." And when she said that, I knew that was God, because I knew that, first of all, ain't nobody walking around telling people they straddling the fence. Like, that's not even a saying that people, that's not even part of people's normal vocabulary, to be like, oh yeah, you straddling the fence. Being that I had just heard that on that video, not even, I would say 2 days max prior, had just heard that on the video. And so when she said that, I knew that God was telling me again in that moment that you need to walk away. And when he told me that, after she said that, I kind of knew in that moment that I have to be obedient to what God is asking me to do. And I'll be honest, there were period of times, I'm trying to get emotional because, but there were periods of time, But I thank God, because one, God gave me courage to come and share this with you all. I'm not a person who even likes to be on live. I'll be honest. I don't like being on live, but I do it because it's what God has asked me to do. But after that moment, I just knew I had to do what He asked me to do. And I had to be obedient to what He was telling me to do. And that day, I think the very next day, I dropped her off at home. And I told her bye. And I didn't know that would be the last time that I would see her, because she ended up passing some months later. But I told her bye. And I remember the last thing I said to her was, give it to God and let Him lead your life. And because I told her, I said, because that's what I'm about to do. I'm about to do the same. And so, even though my tears are from the grief, I'm thankful for God's grace. I'm thankful for God's mercy, because He was very persistent. And if God was like us, He would have left me a long time ago. Like, just to be real, if He was like us, He would have left a long time ago. But one thing about God is God shows, that we can trust Him, that we can lean on Him, that we can rely on Him. And so I made a vow to God that day after everything, because in all honesty, I got to a place to where I said, you know what, God, if this is what you want for my life, if your word is promising me that I can have blessings, I can be financially stable, I can have that marriage that I want, I don't have to suffer. I was like, if your word says all of that, then why not? And that's literally what my journey has become. It's become a story of, because a lot of times when God asks us to do stuff, our story, we respond, sometimes we just quickly respond no. We're like, nah, I ain't doing that. But then sometimes we respond of why. Why do I have to do this? Why do I have to do that? And so what I challenge you all to do is really start to ask yourself, why not? Why not? And one thing that I can say is, that day, after I made the decision to walk away, and in all honesty, I stopped drinking that day because flesh is weak. And I knew that if I drank, I was going to fall right back into the same stuff. So honestly, I haven't had a drink in 11 months because I told, I said, God, if I'm on this journey, I really need to be focused to do the things that you've called me to do. And so I didn't drink, and, I ended up blocking her. So I blocked her and everything because I was like, God, I really want to stay focused on what you're asking me to do. And so it honestly, and I'll tell you this, like, even by me walking away and telling God, it wasn't, at first it wasn't, hey, I agree with everything that you, the word says. There was a period of time where I didn't. But as I started to pray and, God really started to tell God, God, I want you to change my heart. Over time, my view started to change. And when I walked away and told God, hey, God, I'm all in, I told him, I said, and whatever it looks like, God, because ultimately I want the things that you have for me, the things that were specially made for me, Lord, whatever it looks like. If it's made for me and it's made in perfection for me, then that's what I want. And so I told God, I was like, God, you know what? I'm going to walk away from everything. I'm going to be patient I'm going to be patient. I'm being patient right now. And, little did I know that, she was going to pass a few months later after walking away. But one thing about God, even through that process, is God has been showing me time and time again that he is faithful. That he is so faithful, and that we can trust him. And I'll be honest, I'm like a lot of you to where I've had trust issues. People have let me down. I've put my trust in men, and they've fallen short. But one thing about God is God has never let me down. He has never let me down. And it wasn't until, I would say, probably some months after me making the decision to walk away that I realized that, and actually how it came about was I was with one of my friends, and they were talking about this woman, like, oh, she looked good, da 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 da, and the old me would look and be like, oh yeah, da 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 da. But this time when I looked, I felt nothing. I felt nothing, I saw nothing, and she was just a regular person. And so I was like, that's weird. And so I started, like, I would go, and so I was like, let me go, because, we all have our celebrity crush or whatever. So I was like, let me go look at my celebrity crush. And I went to my celebrity crush at the time. They're no longer my celebrity crush. But I went to my celebrity crush at the time, and I felt nothing. And in that moment, I realized that because of my obedience, that God had delivered me from, and you saw in my description, but God had delivered me from the stronghold of homosexuality, to where that lust and those desires that I had before, I no longer have. It's kind of weird to describe it to you all, but it's a place of true deliverance, and I just really want to share with you all, just in wrapping, that if you want to overcome something, or you truly want to get through something, I don't care if it's addiction, if it's depression, if it's anxiety, if it's an illness that you've always had, if it's a deficiency, if it's financial, if there's anything in your life that you truly, truly want to overcome, give it to God. That is the best advice that I can give you all. And I'm not going to sit here and tell you that my journey's been easy, because it has not been. But it's been worth it. It definitely has been worth it. And I promise you this, if you take a step, because all God, as you saw in my journey, all God will ask you to do is take one step at a time. And it doesn't matter how small, sometimes we like, little babies, or, people say turtles are slow, but sometimes that step may be a slow step or a short step. But the important thing is, just as long as you are moving forward, God will meet you right where you are. And as long as you're obedient to what God is telling you to do, He will bring you through. I promise you that. And I promise you that. And so I just want to thank you all for listening to me. I'll be honest, I struggled coming on tonight, but one thing I've learned is if you struggle doing something, that stresses the importance of doing it. And it means that you need to, it's even more of a reason why you need to do it. So being that I struggle, I was like, you know what, that means I need to get up here tonight. But I just want to thank you all for listening to my story. If any of you, if you need any type of encouragement, you just want to talk, definitely inbox me. Hopefully most of you know I do teach Bible study on Facebook Live every other Wednesday. We had it last night, so you can always catch the recordings, or if you want to be a part of even just learning more about who God is, you're always welcome to join our Bible studies. But I love you all so much. Thank you all for the support. Thank you all. I just really appreciate you. And I love you, and I will talk to y'all later. I gotta go eat because I'm hungry, so and I want to get hangry. But I'll talk to you all later, and have a good night.